Okay, so the first thing to do is to start adding some detailing onto our cake. I'm using Saracino for that. It does start off quite crumbly, so you do need to kind of knead it to warm it up and get it into more of a workable paste. I already have my cake covered. It's a 6-inch cake covered in the sugar paste icing, and it's on a 10-inch board for this particular project. That's just corn flour that I keep in there, so I've dusted my board just to stop any sticking, and I had a little bit too much there, so I just cut off any excess. And it is important to keep excess modelling paste as airtight as you can while you're working, so I just use a bit of cling film for any that I might come back to later on during the project. So I'm just rolling that out quite thinly. It doesn't have to be paper thin, but it is, I'd say, about 1 millimetre at most. And then I'm just using my heart cutter there to pop out lots of hearts. And that's just a little bit of water just to start making the sugar paste a bit tacky. Now you will see throughout this that I can be clumsy sometimes, so yeah, putting it straight on with the cutter didn't work, so it was easier for me to pop them on with my fingers, I figured out towards the end. So this is just going to be the border around the top of the, I'll call it a castle cottage. It's more of a cottage than a castle. This cake was made during the lockdown, during the coronavirus, so it was just a cake for me and my family, which consists of my husband Ben. This was for my daughter Phoebe, who was 2, and we've got our son Archie as well. So it was only the 4 of us really that were going to be eating this cake, but she was supposed to be going to Peppa Pig World, and that didn't happen, so I thought the least I could do was make her dream cake. But obviously as it was only the 4 of us, I didn't go for a gigantic castle cake, so it kind of turned into a bit of a cottage style, which I quite liked actually. So these hearts are just kind of the border around the top. I'm just adding more water as I go around the edge. That's all you need to add these on because they're so light and delicate. And as I'm putting them on, I'm just making sure that the points aren't flopping at all. They shouldn't when you're using modelling paste for it. But you just kind of want to make sure that they are all pointing upwards and they're not leaning forwards or backwards at all. Also, it's important to note to start these at the front of your cake, because it might be that the hearts don't match up exactly and you don't want there to be a kind of mismatch at the front. So if you start at the front and work your way round to the back, that's my little ones coming in there to ask me what I'm up to. Yeah, so if there is a bit of a mismatch at the back, then you can kind of space them out a little bit to make it work, or you might need to cut one in half, which doesn't matter too much when it's at the back, but if it was at the front, it would be really obvious. So a good idea to start at the front. So as you can probably see there, I do give them a little bit of a wiggle on the mat as well. And that just helps to kind of make them smoother when you do push them out of the plunger. Sometimes I find anyway, if you don't do that, you can get almost like a furry edge to them, if that makes sense. Okay, so I've just got rid of my mat and put corn flour on my surface. And I've also put a bit of water just around the bottom of the drum and got my larger rolling pin out. And I've just gone to just any ordinary supermarket brand of fondant for the base, because this is just going on the drum. And I've coloured that green. I wanted it to be a soft green. And this is just going to be the grass. Now I'm going to start putting this on from the back and bringing it round to the front, because I didn't want there to be a split at the back, but at the front we're putting some stones on, so it doesn't matter. So I'm just chopping that off at an angle with a sharp knife where I want that stone frontage to go. And where it doesn't quite meet the edge of the board, I'm just rolling that out to meet the edge of the drum. It doesn't matter too much about the thickness difference on this because I will be adding texture to the grass. If it's something that I wasn't adding texture to, I wouldn't use this method, but it doesn't matter too much. And then just use your knife to take off any excess from around the edge of the board. Once that's done, you just take a clean sponge, this is a brand new one, and using the rough side, you just want to press this randomly across the top of your grass, and it just creates a little bit of extra texture. So I'm doing this all over the grass. You do have to press quite firmly with this. Okay, so now I'm just taking some of the grey fondant. Again, this is basic fondant that I've coloured myself. Just cutting a smooth edge, and that's the edge that I want to sit up against my cake. And then I'm using my pebble embosser, trying to line it up where I can. But not worrying too much about it because I am going to make it look a little bit more home done anyway. So I'm just smoothing out where the lines don't quite meet, checking where I want that to go, and using my knife to cut off any excess. Now it doesn't matter about those joins and whether they match exactly, because we are going to be putting some little pebbles on top of there as well anyway, so that will cover up any join that's not supposed to be there. Cutting off the excess, and I always put a little bit of water just underneath those edge pebbles as well, just because sometimes they can come away from the board when you put the ribbon on otherwise. Then I'm just using the sharp end of my Dresden tool just to push down in between the creases to make it look a little bit more homemade, I suppose is the word I'm looking for. And there's also some creases where the embosser didn't quite get it, so I'm putting in any lines that need to be there and just making the indentations from the embosser a little bit more prominent. So I'm pushing down more so they're deeper. That means that when I put the dust on later, it kind of catches it a little bit more and gives it a bit more shadow. Okay, so I've gone back to using Saracino now, as I'm about to put it into a pearl mould, so it just holds its shape and comes out a lot easier. I've dusted it with corn flour, and I'm rolling out a sausage and just pushing that into each of those bead moulds, leaving a little bit of excess on top just to hold the chain together. My fingers were getting a little bit tacky, so I've just rubbed a little bit of corn flour onto them, and it just means that I can manoeuvre that modelling paste how I need it to go. That's my son in the background there. You might be able to see his feet. He was just asking me what I was doing, which is why I pointed to the cake. So we are just doing the borders at the moment that join the two parts, so the stone to the grass. He was playing Move with his daddy, which is a game we use our kitchen tiles for, which is why you can see him hopping from one to the other in the background. So I've just folded that mould back. And there we have our chain of pebbles. A little bit of water just where the grass meets the stone. And I'm using my finger just to measure roughly how many of those pebbles I'll need. And just popping them into place, making sure that they're up against the cake. And then using my scalpel just to cut on the edge of the drum where those beads finish. So again, just a little bit of water. Making sure they're all lined up where I want them to go. And cutting off at the edge of the drum. I'm just going over the top of them with a little bit of water just to remove any of the excess corn flour, and just pushing down around the edges to make sure there are no seams that can be seen. So with the remaining grey, I'm just rolling that into a sausage and kind of flattening down both ends. And then pinching out around the top just to create a little edge. And these are going to be our flower pot bases. And this is with the modelling paste again, because I wanted it to be secure at the base of each tree. It has a bit of weight to hold. And then I've just got a paper straw, the colour that I wanted it to be. Cut that in half. Bit of water on the ends just to make it a bit sticky. And push that into the middle of each of the pots. And they weren't quite equal, so I was just making sure they were the same height and thinking about where I wanted them to go on the board. So to make the trees, just roll out a little sausage shape. I've put a small amount of water onto the straw, and you wind up until it meets the top. And just push it all in together so it holds its shape. So I'm just going to leave those to one side for the moment. Okay, so I've just got some pink modelling paste now and some corn flour down again. Rolling that out quite thinly. And just using my wooden embosser to create a wooden effect on that. And I'm just thinking about what part I'd like my actual door to be. Deciding what way round I'd like it. Okay, so that's going to be the bottom of my door, and I'm just lining it up now to see how wide I need it to be. And I'm leaving that flap at the top just so it's easier for me to hold without damaging any of the wood effect. Okay, so I'm just going to keep holding up, keep checking the width and trimming off any excess that I don't need. Once I'm happy with the width, I'm just taking the excess off of the top. This is going to be a rounded door. So now I'm choosing a circular cutter and just pressing along the top without touching the bottom of the cutter to the door, just to give me an outline of where I need to cut with my scalpel. It gives me a bit of a guide. Okay, so making sure that's neat and equal on both sides. And I found it easier to actually paint the water onto the back of the door rather than onto the cake. Okay, and then just lay that flat down at the bottom and then push it upwards. It was a little bit too long. Okay, then I just went around and smoothed the edges. And then I've just got my little jewellery or brooch mould. And I've got some yellow Saracino modelling paste. Dusted it with some corn flour. And then pushed into the shape that I needed, removing any excess. Pull that out. I didn't want the last one on there anyway because it was too long. And then do the same again. I've gone off screen a little bit there, sorry about that. You saw how the first one was done though, so it's the same process. I didn't have quite enough corn flour in there and it kind of stretched it a little bit when it came out. And I wanted it to look like metal, so I wanted to make sure it was a really clean moulded piece. Okay, and then I just wanted to make a little handle as well. So for that I just took a tiny little piece of the modelling paste and cut it into a rectangular shape using my scalpel. And then I rolled out a really long thin sausage and then looped that round and used my scalpel to cut across where the two ends met and just left that there to dry a little bit. So on the beaded side I just used a little bit of water just to stick that on, making sure it's level with the door. These are going to be the door hinges, so they need to be a bit on the door and a bit on the wall. Then again, using a little bit of water, I'm sticking on that rectangular shape. Clumsy fingers again. And then pasting water around where I want that circle to go, rather than on the circle itself. And then that sits just on top. So I'm just lightly pushing that on. Okay, so I've just got my black rainbow dust out and an ivy green, I believe it was. It's a dark green. These are my dusting brushes. I'm just picking out which one I wanted. So this is the black. And I'm just putting the excess onto a kitchen towel. Because I just want to get inside all of the grooves on these stones to create a shadow effect. So I'm literally just dabbing it onto the excess that's on the kitchen towel and going in and around all of those grooves, paying particularly close attention to around the door and down the edges of the little pebble border, because that's where you're more likely to see the shadows. And then once you're happy with that, I've moved on to a light grey rainbow dust. And I'm going over the tops of the main bulk of the stone. So it's where the highlight would be. So on the tops of the stone, so not near the creases. Again, it's just to create a different tone. Bit of shading, bit of light. And add in a bit of dimension. Then for the grass, I've picked an ivy green rainbow dust, which is one of the darker shades. And I'm just going to create some shadow now on the grass. So again, I'm putting the excess on the kitchen roll. And I'm making sure I'm getting in as close to the castle cottage as I can without going over the white. So it's kind of creating a shadow, and then I'm just bringing it out. So starting right in at the castle and then bringing it out a bit more, but not going right up to the edge. Just to create a bit more texture with that grass. I bought some student brushes, which are great for dusting, but there can be some loose hairs sometimes, so I was just getting one of them off that I saw there. So I was just making sure that I was happy with the final effect. And then I wanted to add a bit of shade to the trees as well. So using the same ivy green, I just dusted in the creases all the way around the tree, just to give them a little bit of added dimension as well. I've got my cat sitting next to me at the moment and she's just started snoring, so I apologise if you can hear that. She's obviously had a long day out chasing birds or something. And then just doing the same with the other one. Okay, so I'm now moving on to the decoration around the board. I'm still using Saracino, and I've had these colours out for a little while, and I'm just going to roll these out really thinly and then leave them out for a little bit as well, mainly because I'm about to use plunger cutters, and where I've just mixed these colours together, the modelling paste has gone very soft and tacky. So if you roll them and then leave them for a bit, it just gives them a chance to dry up so that when I use the cutters, I get a sharper edge. So I've got two greens for two different leaves around the door, and then I've got this kind of bluey, purpley kind of colour, but it's a bit more blue than purple, and then a lilac. Okay, so before I move on to the flowers, I wanted to put a couple of windows. So I'm just using this blue here and leaving the offcuts because I know I can get some flowers off of those. And I don't know if you can see, but I'm just using the board to get the measurements. So they're both 3 centimetres wide. And I'm using the cutter like I did with the door just to mark where I want the tops of those windows to be. And I was measuring the height of those. I think I went for 3.5 centimetres is where the arch starts. Turning them back round and using the scalpel just to follow that cutter line to give me a nice arch. And as I said, I'm leaving those offcuts there because they'll be drying off, ready to use for the flowers. Okay, so these are going to be my little arched wooden shutters, I suppose they are, on my little cottage. And then I'm using the sharp end of my Dresden tool to draw a line down the middle. Then I did 3 little lines at the top, left a gap and put 4 little lines on the bottom to create that shutter effect. And then I thought it would be quite nice for them to have a little picture or something in the middle where that space is. So I've just used one of my plungers to put the same flowers that are going to be around the door as a picture on the window. And because I'm using them as a picture, I've just made sure that I've not pressed the whole way through. So I've got a bit of water on the back, lining it up where I want it, and just smoothing that across. And the same for the window on the other side. I just realised you might be able to hear my husband as well. He's in his study, I think playing some kind of Call of Duty game or something. So they're talking about helicopters and all sorts. Apologies if you can hear that as well. So I've got a little bit of pink Saracino here. I left this chunkier. Oh, my phone's bleeping at me now as well. They say everything happens at once, don't they? Left this a little bit chunkier because I wanted it to almost act like a little like flower pot kind of window ledge. So just matching that up, checking it's the size that I want it to be. It wasn't quite long enough, so I'm just making that a little bit longer. And then I wanted to make sure that the other one was the same width, so just flattening that out so that it's the same as this side. Checking the length for that one. And cutting at an angle, just so it sits around the base of our window. And again, I've put the same little picture in the middle on the front of both of those. And just one line on each side using the Dresden tool. I just thought it looked pretty, not any particular reason. Okay, so a bit of water on the back of those. And those are just sitting. I'm not pushing the tops of them right into the window, just around the sides and at the base, just to give it that almost a bit more of a 3D element to it. So looking at the edge of the windows, I just wanted to add a little something. So I got some yellow Saraceno, rolled it into a thin sausage and put some water around the edge of the shutters. And then I've just trimmed off one end with a scalpel and just put in some light pressure as I'm putting that sausage around the edge of the window, and then cutting the ends off with the scalpel in line with the windowsill. And I'm going to paint that gold later to match the door. And then just matching up the other side as well. So rolling out the sausage. I have found if you use a smoother to do this on a surface that isn't smooth, so a bit more tacky, which is why I don't do it on my mat, it rolls out a sausage that is exactly the same width all the way along. Whereas if you use your fingers, it can create the indentations of where your fingers are. Just a little tip if you haven't seen that one before. Okay, so I've just spent a while using my plungers just to cut out 2 different types of leaves and 2 different colour little daisy petals or flowers even, from those 4 colours that we had laid out. And I've just put some water just around the first edge of my door, and I'm just laying the leaves on, then a couple of flowers, and I did put a couple of flowers on top of the leaves as well, just kind of built it up as I went around, had a look at what I thought was that looked good. Some leaves I had going in different directions, some overlapping on the door as if it hadn't been open for a while, and just kind of building up the archway. What was really lovely is when my daughter actually got this cake, the first thing she did was try to open the door. She was quite disappointed when she realised it was a cake and not a little house she could play with, bless her. But it shows that it looked realistic, so that was the main thing. I was quite chuffed. I'm not sure she was that happy though. She wanted a little doll's house, bless her. She did end up getting one actually, just not a cottage one. See, I'm just building up little bits of water as I go round. And also you may have just seen there, I'm kind of flicking out a couple of the edges of the leaves, just so they don't sit completely flat to the cake and that they look a little bit more lifelike. And then I wanted to paint these hinges gold, so I wanted to make sure that the flowers went around the hinges and didn't sit on top of them. So I thought it would look quite nice with the spare leaves and flowers that I had, just to put a couple on each of the windowsills as well. So I just went for one leaf and one flower on each of them. Again, just a little bit of water to attach those. We're very nearly there now. I was just holding them up against the trees to see if I wanted them on the trees, but I decided that actually it looks better without them. So I've put some water on the base of those big trees to attach them to the fondant. But as you can see, I used the brush to really brush it on quite a lot and work up the modelling paste so that it almost forms a bit of a tacky surface on the bottom rather than just dabbing water on, just to make sure they're definitely secure. And then I just wanted to finish it off with a couple of little flowers on the lawn as well. Just on either side. So again, just a little bit of water to attach those. And I did a mixture of the blue and the lilacs. Couple at the back, just in case anybody's sitting behind the cake for whatever reason. Always nice to have a little something at the back of the cake, isn't it? And then one of the final things to do was paint the hinges, the door handle, and around the window shutters, the yellow parts, gold. So I've got one of the click pens for that. So you literally just click the top of it. It's like a paintbrush on the end, and the gold edible paint just comes through the bottom. Makes it much easier for just for little details like this. So it was just a case of painting that on. So one of the final things to do, I'd use my Cake Star cutters to cut out my lowercase letters for Phoebe's name. They were cut out in modelling paste, the Saracino again, in a pink, the same pink as the door. And I just wanted them to sit on top. So I'm just, again, using a little bit of water and placing them where I want them to be. Trying to stand them up as well, so they're not laying flat on the cake, they're actually standing letters. So I had some leftover candy floss from my children had some treats. So I wanted it to look like Peppa Pig was standing on like a pink fluffy cloud, because I've made her as a fairy previously. So I've just gone to get her now, I believe. Move the camera so you can actually see what I'm doing over here now. So I've literally just sat the candy floss on top. I haven't attached it with anything because it's more than likely going to melt. And then I got my cocktail sticks. These are Peppa Pig's legs, so I haven't actually attached her to those yet. I'm just painting a little bit of water onto the bottom of them. I did her model a couple of days ago, so she is rather dry now. Pushing one long cocktail end up and one short cocktail end up, and then into the cake through the candy floss. So it looks like she's standing on a little cloud. And then I've got some of my hologram rainbow dust. I absolutely love this stuff. And just using an old paintbrush, this is one I use for glazing and all sorts, just to pick some up and then tapping it around. And I don't know if you can really see it here, so I'll show you a little video at the end, but it just makes it look really shiny and glittery. And I'll show you the picture now. There you go. This is it all finished. I've put a little purple ribbon around the bottom as well. Hopefully you can see a little bit of the glitz on the candy floss cloud. And all of that dusting really does make a difference. So here's the topper that I made the other day as well. I gave her some little fairy wings and used some pearl dust for those as well. I hope you've enjoyed the tutorial. Thank you very much for joining me. If you have enjoyed it and got something from it, please like and subscribe to see any more, and I hope to see you again very soon. As a final picture, here's my little daughter Phoebe playing and eating with the fondant trees. Thanks very much everyone. Hope to see you again soon. Love from Cakes.